Hello, English 212A. I'm holding up a sheet of paper that goes over the 5 points that came out of the Synod of Dort. These points were really important for American Puritans. It was held in the Netherlands from 1618 to 1619, and these are the major 5 points, and these are really important for our Puritans. The easy way to remember them is to look at the first letter of each of these points, and it spells out tulip. You can see it's the vertical first letters, tulip, and it's the easy way to remember all 5. And so I'll go over them and try to explain them a little bit. So the Puritans were heavy Calvinists, and as Calvinists, they believed in these points. The first was total depravity, and this means that if you were not given grace by God, you were considered to be totally depraved. The natural spirit of humanity was totally depraved. The only thing that uplifted people from this was the grace of God. The next point is unconditional election. This means that nothing you can do in your life will assure that God will give you grace, that He will choose you as a person to fill with a spirit of love and grace and goodness. So nothing you could do could change this. So that's unconditional election. God elects you strictly according to His own will. Limited atonement emphasizes that not everybody in the world will be elected. Not everybody will receive grace. This means that lots of people will not receive atonement. A lot of people will burn in hell. The next one is irresistible grace. This means that if God chooses you, if He wants to give you grace, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way that you can resist it. Even if you were to go out and commit horrendous crimes, this still would not prevent God from giving you grace if He chose to. It's unlikely that God would ever give a criminal grace, but this is within the power of God because God is omnipotent. And then the next one, the last one, is perseverance of saints. And this means that if God has given you grace, that you will persevere with grace. There is nothing you can do to change this. Those who are considered to be saints will be saints forever, for eternity. They will go to heaven. They are saints. And so this all came up because of the Arminian heresy controversy that was happening. And the Arminian heresy was a belief that you could do works in your life, and this would affect God's gift of grace to you, that you could have some sort of role, some sort of power in this exchange with God. And so that would be called the covenant of works. That the covenant of works went away, according to the Puritans, when humanity fell from the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve broke the covenant with God to not eat from the tree of knowledge. They broke the covenant of works. And then after that, we were going to have the covenant of grace. And then the 5 points of the Synod of Dort emphasize how the covenant of grace works. I'm holding up a little sheet of paper to help illustrate Puritan conversion morphology. The writing may not be that clear, but I'll say a lot of the main stuff. And so the Puritans were very into the idea of conversion, the idea of receiving grace. This was really important for them. And so if you did not receive any grace from God, you were unconverted, you were unregenerate, you were a natural person. And so that comes up over here, a life of sin, a natural person. And then once you start finding faith and going to church and thinking about the state of your soul and trying to lead a better life and looking deep into yourself, the Puritans called this preparation. And so I have this illustration would say you're about here on this. You're just beginning the life of a godly person. You haven't received grace yet, but you're trying to prepare for it. You're trying to make yourself amenable to God. There's a little controversy here too, because there's really nothing you could do that would cause God to give you grace. But the Puritans were dealing with the paradox. They wanted you, if you were a Puritan, to be within the church, to hope for grace, prepare for grace, even though in the final scheme of things, you had no power over what God was going to do to you or do for you. And so the minister who emphasized this preparation and how to go about it in an extreme way was Thomas Hooker. And he called when you were like groveling in the dirt and you were like sick of yourself and you saw how terrible you were and how weak you were and how you really just wanted God, you were hungry for God to help you. He called this the true sight of sin. And he considered this to be really important for conversion. For him, it was unlikely that God would give you grace unless you experienced how terrible you were, unless you saw a true sight of how sinful you really were. And then the minister who really emphasized the point of grace was John Cotton. So I'm trying to put my finger here. John Cotton really emphasized the point of receiving grace, justification. And he was considered by some people to be kind of an extremist, a person who really was into that lightning bolt moment of receiving grace. And as a person who believed really in this lightning bolt moment, he found a person who really loved his ideas, and that was Anne Hutchinson, who was also into this notion of the lightning bolt of grace. When she was having controversies with other Puritan ministers, she would say things like, "Don't talk to me of works, don't talk to me of anything else. Talk to me of grace, about the Spirit of God coming to me." And so that's a really important moment for the Puritans, though, the grace. And Anne Hutchinson really emphasized it even more than John Cotton. And then after you received grace, you were considered to be a visible saint, meaning that you were a person who would lead a holy life. You were a person living in sanctification. And then there was this one minister, Thomas Shepard, who emphasized that even though you received sanctification, you received grace, your life would still have ups and downs, which is why I have these little wavy lines along that straight line over here. And that wavy line was something that Thomas Shepard would call combat. You were going back and forth, still feeling like you were imperfect, but you were trying really hard. And so your life would still have controversy. That would be the combat, even though you were a saint. And then once you had been sanctified because of the perseverance of saints, you were still going to be a saint, but you could always have anxiety. Did you really receive grace? Were you really sanctified? And so Thomas Shepard wanted to put a little bit of insecurity along with the idea, and a lot of people liked Thomas Shepard's sermons and his thinking. So I'm going to sign off now, but I hope this illustrates for you a little bit about Puritan conversion morphology. I just want to add a little bit more on the Puritans. They were really fundamentalist Christians. They subscribed to Calvinism, and they believed in God's absolute power over every aspect of their lives. They believed in predestination, that God had decided long before what was going to happen to every person, but we did not know what this destiny was. God was in some ways inscrutable, mysterious, and so we had to lead our lives as well as we could, hoping that we would receive grace, that we would be destined for heaven. God was omniscient, God was omnipotent, God was all-powerful.